The battle for Aleppo intensifies. Rebel suicide bombers hit the regime. And in Idlib, a Russian helicopter is shot down, killing 5. Good evening. The besieged city of Aleppo in Syria has suffered a battering in the last 24 hours, as first the Assad regime and then the rebels mounted ferocious new offensives. In Idlib, rebels also shot down a Russian helicopter, killing all 5 on board. It was the deadliest single loss for Russia since it joined the war. Tonight, we also have a first look at a unique portrait of the rebels in Aleppo by documentary maker Paul Refstal, who spent weeks with a team of suicide bombers.
زر الدقمة أضغط عليه بإذن الله أرسلهم على جهنم بإذن الله تعالى.
Also tonight, has Donald Trump picked the wrong woman to fight with? We don't mean Hillary. Mr. Trump's attack on the mother of an American Muslim soldier who died in Iraq backfires. Tonight, she speaks up.
I don't want to talk that much about Mr. Trump. I just want to say that I am a Muslim woman and I am very strong.
The Labour peer Lord Janner went to his grave facing multiple counts of sexual offences against young boys. Tonight, his son tells us he was innocent and the allegations are malicious.
We're now at 33. We started with 1 in 1991. And since he had dementia, the numbers have grown as the compensation, or the prospect of compensation, grows.
And later in tonight's programme, I'll be talking to the Labour leadership challenger, Owen Smith, as the man he plans to unseat, Jeremy Corbyn, wins the backing of one of the country's biggest unions to remain in place. The battle for the Syrian city of Aleppo continues to rage, with more than 250,000 people in rebel-held areas surrounded by forces loyal to the Assad regime. It's the largest city in Syria, and the fight to control it has reached a critical phase. Government forces control western Aleppo. Last week, they cut off the Castello Road, the last supply route into the rebel-controlled east. It's thought that food could run out in a matter of weeks. Today, rebels launched a new assault on government positions from the southwest and brought down a Russian military helicopter in the area. And a warning, this report from our international editor Lindsay Hilsum does contain some graphic images.
They didn't launch their suicide mission until the drone was up and ready to film. The truck approaches a school housing Syrian government troops. The driver doesn't hesitate. And then another. In the last 24 hours, the battle for Aleppo entered a new and deadly phase. Rebel forces have been preparing, led by a group with a white flag calling itself Al-Fatah al-Sham. They used to be the Al-Nusra Front with its distinctive black flag. But they've rebranded and claim to have cut links with Al-Qaeda, trying to shed their jihadi image. They've teamed up with other rebel groups, some Islamists, some not, to take on the Syrian army and their Russian backers in Aleppo.
We, the Al-Fatah army, have gathered our weapons, hardware and men ready to liberate the southwestern front of Aleppo, to enter the city and lift the siege on women and children. We're using heavy weapons, including 122 and 130mm rocket launchers, tanks and armoured vehicles. Many fighters will storm the city.
Over the weekend, people in rebel-held Aleppo went on the streets, chanting the slogan from the early days of the Arab Spring. The people demand the fall of the regime. What innocent days those were, before hundreds of thousands were killed, millions forced to flee. Raise your voice, sing the women. We live in dignity or we die. They're setting tyres ablaze to create black smoke so Russian and Syrian Air Force bombers can't see their targets. It fills the air. Gestures of defiance and They're digging to make the besieged suburbs bloom, filling containers with earth. But these will be seeds of despair rather than hope.
With the civilian volunteers, we have a kitchen garden project to grow seeds, to increase the amount of food for the local market and resist the siege.
Just outside Aleppo in the countryside, civilians are rushed to hospital. There's fighting and bombing all around. Aid agencies can get their message out, but it's increasingly difficult to get supplies in.
Some of the patients that you see here now are critically injured. We've got a child here who's got shrapnel to his torso section. We've got another child here who came in yesterday from a bomb that landed just outside the hospital, and we've had to amputate his leg.
They're getting treatment, but no one's safe. The Russians have bombed at least 8 medical facilities in Aleppo in the last week. Today, a Russian helicopter was shot down in Idlib. All 5 crew are believed to have been killed. This is a good day for those who would overthrow President Bashar al-Assad. But victory is fleeting in this war. After the suicide bomb in Aleppo, rebels picked their way through the bodies of Syrian soldiers killed in the blast. But they know tomorrow it may be their turn.
Well, a little earlier, I spoke via the internet to Hamza Al-Khatid, a doctor at Al-Quds Hospital in Aleppo. And I started by asking him what had been going on in the city over the past few hours.
It was a huge bombing, and we have seen a lot of weapons that we haven't seen before. We have it was more than 200 airstrike all over Aleppo. Only in the hospital area it was 40 airstrike. It was explosive barrels, mortars, airstrikes, rockets. It was a huge bombing all over Aleppo in the last 24 hours.
What do you think of this humanitarian corridor?
It's a big lie, and we have seen that a lot in other places, other sieged places. The regime are sieging at the moment about 14 cities, 14 area are sieged by the regime. None of them has humanitarian exits or boats. None of them get supplies by airplanes, as the regime claims. It's a big lie. There is nothing such safe exits or stuff like that. Whole the area, the 4 exits that the regime has claimed that he has opened. The whole boats for those exits are targeted by snipers. So it's only a big lie.
What we're seeing at the moment is a rebel offensive, people fighting back against the regime. Do you not think that is also futile and only causing more deaths and injuries?
Of course not. Of course not. Because the regime are the rebel fighting are only at the moment and always only towards military areas. There's not fighting or attacks over the civilian places or areas, such as the regime did all the time.
So do you support the rebel fighting?
Of course. Especially it's targeted only military areas. It's for open award for humans. It's for a new hope for 350,000 people. So of course I support that.
Isn't there a contradiction between you being a doctor and you supporting military action, supporting rebel fighting?
The hospital that I work in has been targeted 3 times during the last 3 years. 10 of my colleagues have been killed by Al-Assad regime, and no one tried to stop that. No one tried to protect us, to protect the people inside of Aleppo city. And we have seen nothing from the United Nations. We have seen nothing from the great nations as Britain or Germany or America. So we have two choices. The first one is to fight and die in honor, and the other way is to die in silence, and we will only record as numbers that the regime have killed.
So would your plea be to British politicians to look again at military action in Syria?
Of course, of course.
What should they do?
They should give more support for people, for the rebels.
The doctor, Hamza Al-Khatib, speaking to me from Aleppo. And later in the programme, an extraordinary look behind rebel lines as the filmmaker Paul Restal meets two would-be suicide bombers and asks why they're prepared to kill and die in such a terrible way.
Now, the United States has carried out airstrikes in Libya targeting the Islamic State group. The Libyan Prime Minister Fayez Sarraj said the strikes were carried out in the port city of Sirte at his request, resulting in what he calls severe losses to enemy ranks. Forces aligned with the UN-backed government have been battling Islamic State in the city since May, and the White House says it will continue to support the campaign.
This is an example of us providing support, military support, for a partner on the ground that is trying to reclaim their country and provide security, stability for their people, and targeting a group that has a hateful ideology that aims to do ill to the people of Libya and to the people of the United States.
The son of the late Labour peer, Lord Janner, has broken his silence over the allegations of sexual abuse made against his father. Daniel Janner, who is himself a leading QC, says the Goddard inquiry investigation into the claims is like putting a dead man on trial. In a moment, we'll be hearing from Daniel Janner, but first, Paul McNamara reports on the background to the allegations.
He graced the corridors of power for 4 decades, a position that made him untouchable according to his alleged victims. An MP since 1970, allegations of child abuse were first levelled against Lord Greville Janner in 1991. Allegations he used the cloak of parliamentary privilege to refute.
There was, of course, not a shred of truth in any of the allegations of criminal conduct made against me.
The Leicester West MP was named in the trial of Frank Beck, a serial child sex offender who worked in children's homes across Leicestershire. Lord Janner was interviewed by police, but the evidence was deemed insufficient, a pattern that would continue. Further investigations would follow in 2002 and 2006, both ending almost as soon as they started. But over time, more alleged victims would come forward, some with similar stories of meeting the MP during school visits in the 70s and being invited to tour the Houses of Commons. Last summer, Channel 4 News interviewed Paul Miller, who says on one of these trips he was abused in the chapel beneath Parliament.
The rest of the group left, and I was left on my own with him in the chapel. And then, to be honest, all of a sudden out of the blue, he just grabbed me and embraced me.
In his later life, Lord Janner was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. He deteriorated rapidly. Owing to his poor health, in April 2015, the Crown Prosecution Service announced they would not charge him, despite mounting pressure. Soon after, an independent inquiry was launched into the handling of previous investigations, led by Sir Richard Henriquez. His report found that there was sufficient evidence to prosecute Greville Janner in 1991, then again in 2002, and again finally in 2007. Strong words, but this report was published in January this year, 5 weeks after Lord Janner passed away. His alleged crimes will now be investigated by Dame Goddard in her overarching inquiry into historic child abuse. Throughout his ill health, Lord Janner was supported by his children, who to this day deny their father could ever be capable of such crimes.
Well, our political correspondent Michael Crick has been speaking to Greville Janner's son, Daniel.
Now, you told the Sunday Times that none of the claims against your father are true.
None of the claims are true.
How do you know that?
Because the evidence says so. These are people who have made false accusations in the past.
All of them?
Not all of them, of course not. Many of them have made false accusations in the past. None of them came forward in 1991 when there was a national scandal when my father was framed, or there was an attempt to frame him, by Frank Beck, a convicted paedophile with one person who came forward and gave evidence in support of Frank Beck, claiming abuse by my father.
But you say that they haven't come forward until recently, but are you really saying that all of those people are only coming forward because they want money?
I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever. My father was the most wonderful person of the greatest integrity. He was framed in 1991, and these people are jumping on the bandwagon of one complaint in 1991. There is absolutely no doubt about it. My father became live bait, to use the term by Cliff Richard. My father became live bait, and as a result of the lack of anonymity for a suspect, these people came forward. Only this Sunday, of very serious allegations in respect of the principal complainant, who made a false allegation against a woman care worker that was proved to be wholly false. And that person was the principal person behind all this in 1991, who gave evidence in the Frank Beck trial. And it's only decades later, when my father had a severe dementia, that these people are now using that as a tool against him. You know, what's happened in recent times with these high-profile cases, people who are famous, people who are perceived to be wealthy, is that they are now vulnerable targets. The Cliff Richards of the world are vulnerable targets. The Leon Brittons are vulnerable targets. The difference in my father's case are the numbers game. You know, these are weak allegations. Just because there are many of them does not make it stronger. The game they are playing is to increase the numbers.
Did you actually ask him about the 1991 allegation, or did you just take his word for it?
In 1991, he made of course, it was horrendous in 1991. It had national massive publicity when complainant number one came out and said what he did. He was horrified. He was absolutely horrified. Of course, the latest allegations all came out when he had dementia, severe dementia, which no one believed. Sadly, he was dragged to court inhumanely when he needn't have been, and wasn't in a position to answer those allegations.
What did you think when you read about the letters that your father signed to this boy, Love Greville? There's one letter where he says, it seems strange not having you flipping around like a friendly flea. In fact, I miss you. See you at the Holiday Inn on Tuesday.
There is nothing,
Jonathan will arrange for a bed for you in the sitting room.
Can I just interrupt you to say there is nothing indecent in those letters, as you know, and as Henriquez found. They were affectionate letters, and even Sir Richard Henriquez found they were entirely neutral. Those letters have been used against him and us, when in fact he was just being extremely nice, and he's like that with everybody.
But they're unusual, aren't they? I mean, if you or I or...
The problem is nowadays you turn kindness into suspicion.
So what do you hope then, that the whole thing just gets dropped and that these allegations are never tested? You're not going to cooperate with the Goddard inquiry. Do you just want the whole thing to go away and the truth of these allegations not be properly tested?
Of course we want them properly tested, and of course we want the truth, and of course we want justice. We can't get justice through a failure, but through our inability to cross-examine in the Goddard inquiry. The only way we are going to get justice now is in the civil proceedings. So I very much hope that we will be given the opportunity to cross-examine these people where they have criminal convictions, to cross-examine them on these convictions. Where they've made false accusations in the past, we want to cross-examine them on it. Why they never came forward before, we want to cross-examine on them. We want to explain...
You're going to take them on one by one, all 33?
We have decided as a family, this is what we are going to do. This is what we want to spend the inheritance on, is contesting these allegations, these false accusations, and preserve his good name. The worst allegation was a 3-day period when he was meant to be in a hotel room with one of the accusers. We have his passport for those 3 days. He was in Australia, on the other side of the world.
Daniel Janner speaking to Michael Crick there. Now, their appearance on the stage at the Democratic Convention delighted the delegates, but sparked a controversy which has been fueled by the response of the Republican presidential nominee, Donald Trump. I've been speaking to Kazir and Ghazala Khan, but first, Here's what's happened so far.
Please welcome Kaiser Khan from Charlottesville, Virginia.
It was one of the most powerful speeches of the Democratic Convention. The father of Army Captain Humayun Khan, an American Muslim soldier who lost his life in Iraq, speaking out against Donald Trump's stance on Islam and minorities. Captain Khan died running towards a vehicle full of explosives heading for a US Army base. Yet his father said, if Mr. Trump had his way, he would never even have been in America.
Donald Trump, have you ever been to Arlington Cemetery? Go look at the graves of brave patriots who died defending United States of America. You will see all faiths, genders, and ethnicities. You have sacrificed nothing and no one.
Who would dare challenge them, breaking the unspoken code of always honouring the families of the fallen in America? Donald Trump, that's who. First,
I think I made a lot of sacrifices. I worked very, very hard. I've created thousands and thousands of jobs, tens of thousands of jobs.
Then questioning why the bereaved mother had stayed silent.
You look at his wife, she was standing there, she had nothing to say. She probably, maybe she wasn't allowed to have anything to say, you tell me, but plenty of people have written that.
Donald Trump continues to defend himself on social media, this on Twitter today. Mr. Khan, who does not know me, viciously attacked me from the stage of the DNC and is now all over TV doing the same. Nice. Well, earlier I spoke to Mr. and Mrs. Khan from our Washington studio. I first asked Mrs. Khan what she made of Donald Trump's criticism of her silence.
I was really surprised that he didn't see my grief or my pain, and he's just asking me this question, why I did not talk. It's a surprise, but I don't want to talk that much about Mr. Trump. I just want to say that I am a Muslim woman and I am very strong. I have very strong feeling. I have very strong beliefs that I can say anything I want. There is no restriction in Islam to say truth, to say good words to each other, and to be respectful.
He clearly was inferring that precisely because of your religion, you were effectively being silenced by your husband. You weren't allowed to speak. Did you find that offensive?
I don't find it offensive, but I find it very funny that he brings religion at that time when I was really in pain. 4-year-old, my granddaughter asked me when I went, Bibi Shirin, I saw you on TV, but why were you so sad? 4-year-old can see the pain, and he was relating, instead of to pain, he was saying that I wasn't allowed to say. He doesn't know anything about Islam.
Mr. Khan, can I ask you, why did you decide to tackle Mr. Trump so directly in your speech?
I felt compelled, morally, ethically compelled to tell him, we migrated to United States, we are patriotic American Muslims. Somebody had to stand up there and say directly to him, and I have said it many a time thereafter, he is a demagogue. He does not represent American values. In a leader, you need empathy, you need moral compass. This candidate is void of both.
On a personal rather than a political note, if you like, how difficult has it been as the father of and mother of an American Muslim soldier who died in service to hear some of the language that has been used around the Muslim population?
It has been very hard for us, for the family. But we sat before going to the convention, the whole family discussed the consequences that could, the bad consequences that could happen, and we unanimously agreed, the way I felt, the way my wife feels, the way my children feel, that it is our obligation to voice.
And Mrs. Khan, I mean, it's clearly very difficult for you to talk about your son, and in a sense you've been forced to do that by what's happened over the last couple of days. What do you remember about him?
He was a very strong person, and he always tried to bring people together. And he always told me, okay, Mom, if you give love, you will receive more than you expected.
Do you feel that in some way Mr. Trump's comments, though, blacken his name, his memory?
I don't think anybody can lay on his memory or his name or his love. He is forever.
And Mr. Khan, can I ask how you would feel about living in America under President Trump?
Just imagine if he governs the way he has campaigned, this country will have constitutional crises that this country has never seen. For example, to exclude 11 million people, the only thing he can do is issue executive order. Congress will not pass such a law. What is he going to do? Is he going to go door to door and find and carry them in and put them in aeroplane or ships to throw them out? This person hasn't thought through.
And Mrs. Khan, if Donald Trump were to apologise to you, would that be enough? Would you accept it?
I would accept the apology. Whatever he wants, he should do, but I respect him. Because I'm not a person who disrespects anyone, even if they are my enemies. I don't want that type, I'm not that type of person.
The mother and father of Captain Humayun Khan speaking to us earlier. Now, Jeremy Corbyn has received the backing of one of the country's biggest trade unions in his fight for the Labour leadership. The Communication Workers Union said he was a leader for the millions, not the millionaires. In a speech to union delegates, Mr. Corbyn pledged to ban zero-hours contracts and renationalise the Royal Mail, and he stressed the importance of unity within his party.
In opposition, you can achieve quite a lot if you're united in doing so. I am determined that this party will take it to the Tories, will demand a different economic strategy, will protect the living standards and rights of those with disabilities, will invest in housing and will promote a growing economy within our society.
Now, we had hoped to hold a television hustings tonight between the Labour leadership candidates, but that hasn't been possible. Hopefully, it will happen later in the summer. But as you can see, the Labour leadership challenger, Owen Smith, has joined us tonight. Good evening.
Evening.
Do you believe that for Labour to win the next election, you need to win over Tory voters and therefore fight from the centre? Or are there enough people on the left and the far left to win a general election?
No, we've got to win over Tory voters. People have voted Liberal Democrat, people have voted Green, right across the country. Labour only ever wins if we are able to forge a coalition in the country. We only ever win if we're able to be united in holding together. The coalition is the Labour Party itself. And that's why it's so disappointing Jeremy isn't coming on the show to debate with me this evening as he'd promised and as I was expecting. Because I'd like to say to Jeremy, how is he going to unite the party? We've never looked more disunited. And it's never been, I think, more worrying for Labour that we can't go to the country and try and persuade people to vote for us and put their trust in us. Because right now they've lost faith and I think we've lost respect in the country, and it's pretty desperate.
So why do you think it makes sense to be on a platform more to the left of Ed Miliband?
Well, I'm on a platform on things that I believe in. I fundamentally
believe... But you're on the left, aren't you? You're to the left.
I'm totally on the left.
And yet you've just told me you need to fight from the centre and win over Tory voters.
Well, I think you are oversimplifying what left and right wants in this country. I think the reality is people who are middle class, working class, salaried, working week to week, day to day, all want to see public services properly provided for, all want to see the wealthiest in society pay their fair share, all want to see a government that's investing in different parts of the country, not just in the southeast and in London. That isn't left or right. That's just good common sense. We've got major problems in Britain, and Labour should be speaking for the people. And that's not about left or right. It's just about saving country.
Well, one of the places you're definitely to the right of Jeremy Corbyn on is immigration, because you've said there are too many immigrants in some parts of the country. What are you going to do about it?
Well, first of all, that's, again, a simplification of what I've said. I'm not going to do what others have done in this country, which is bandy around racist language or intolerant language about immigration. But we've got to be honest with the country, which is a lot of people who voted in particular to leave at the European referendum did so because they were worried about pressure on schools and hospitals and doctors' surgeries, and they attributed that to immigration.
So what are you
And in
going to do
some
about
parts of
that?
the country- well, invest is the principle.
So it's improve the schools and hospitals,
Absolutely
not
right.
cut the immigrants.
Absolutely right. The principal thing we in Labour should be doing is putting together what I've called a British New Deal. We've spent a lot of time and effort and money, we may do again this week, floating the bankers in Britain. It's time we started floating people and communities, and that means borrowing. £200 billion worth of borrowing I advocate in order to invest.
But just on the number of immigrants, before we get to public services, I mean, are you saying we don't need to cut the number of immigrants coming into Britain?
Well, I'm saying in certain parts of the country, it's been a massive benefit for us to have high immigration. And in other parts of the country, it's definitely led to some
So do
pressure
you want to cut them or
on
not?
wages. Well, I'm saying we need an honest conversation with people.
Well, have an
about
honest
it.
conversation
Well,
with me then. Do you
having
want
one.
to cut them or not?
I'm having one. I'm saying in certain parts of the country, it's been a benefit. In other parts, it's
So
been
do
a
you want,
disbenefit.
in the parts where there are too many, would you like to cut
I
them?
would be going into the European Union negotiations right now, arguing for what I think the British people wanted, which is, yes, a greater measure of control over migration, plus the benefits of being a trading partner within the European Union. It isn't a binary choice. It's changing, I think, in lots of European
What about
markets.
freedom of movement then?
Well, that's what I'm saying does need to be on the table. We need to be arguing powerfully across Europe that we need both our cake and to
So you're
eat
like
it.
David Cameron. You want to be in Europe because you want to campaign for Britain to reject Brexit in a second referendum, but you think we should, do something about freedom of movement.
I'm saying that we should be asking for the Labour Party that argued, I think, for us to be in the European Union, now that we're leaving the European Union, to be strong and in favour of our principles, standing up still for
But
staying
you want to
in
resist
Europe.
it, don't you? You
No,
want
no,
to resist
I
leaving
absolutely want to
the
resist.
European Union.
I absolutely want to resist. I think it was a major mistake by
You want
Jeremy.
to overturn us, in fact, don't you?
No, I think it was a major mistake by Jeremy to come out on the following day and say, let's trigger Article 50 straight away. I think it reveals his ambivalence about Europe.
But do you want to
I'm not
overturn
ambivalent.
it at a second referendum?
I would like Britain to remain within the European Union. I would like that to be the Labour Party's position. But in order to get to the point where we can ask the British people once more to rubber stamp the deal, either at a general election or at a second referendum, we need, first of all, to negotiate toughly in Europe. And that
Well, except
does
you
mean-
can't negotiate in opposition,
Yes,
can you?
well,
So would you
no,
be the party
absolutely. We
of
can
the
ask for that.
48% or not?
No, we should be arguing, Christian, that the Labour Party, that has 9 million people who voted for it at this last election, and where 67% of those people voted to stay within the European Union, we should be arguing that Labour has a mandate and a right to sit alongside the Tories and negotiate. This is much bigger than party politics. It's a thing Jeremy didn't understand, I think, in arguing in Brexit. This has got the biggest consequences for this generation and subsequent generations of any political decision. It's bigger than any general election. It's bigger than any party. So Labour should be arguing really toughly at European levels that we want to both have our cake and eat it.
Let's talk about whether you're ready for leadership, because you've had a couple of sort of rocky moments. You've said things that came out wrong, certainly. What were you thinking when you said you'd like to smash Theresa May back on her heels?
I was thinking that the Labour Party's been a weak opposition in recent years. And we've sat by, whilst the Tories have privatised the NHS effectively, we've sat by where they've destroyed great institutions like Sure Start.
But that's very violent language, isn't it? I mean,
well, I have apologised for it, because I think it was...
But where did it come from, the idea of smashing a woman politician back on her
Well, that's
heels?
not quite what I was saying, because if you've seen the
Well, it's
speech...
what you said.
If you've seen the speech, what I was talking about was smashing back Tory ideology, Tory ideas. It obviously wasn't intended to be referring to Mrs May in person. I'd never have dreamed.
But people are wondering whether you're a bit unsound on gender, because you also suggested to Leanne Wood that she got more TV exposure because of her gender.
Well, again, that's a misreading what actually happened. We were debating our relative.
You said she gets on more because of her gender.
Look, and she wasn't offended by it, and we were talking in a much more general sense. And obviously, my opponents, some of the people who are supporting Jeremy Corbyn, some of the people in the right-wing press in this country, will seek to blow out of all proportion anything that I say. I'm expecting that, Christian. This is a leadership contest. The stakes are incredibly high. But that's why I'm coming out, speaking to you today, making my pitch. I'll be doing it right across the country. I think Jeremy needs to do the same.
The trouble is people are still trying to
important.
work out what you really are, because right now you say you're on the left, and you've been a very pro-Corbyn member of the Shadow Cabinet when you were there. You were a great supporter of Ed Miliband, and you were a great supporter of Tony Blair. You were asked in 2006 whether there was anything other than the Iraq War you disagreed with him on, and you said no, there wasn't. So are you a Blairite, a Milibandite, or a Corbynista?
I'm none of those. I'm a Smithite, very, very clear. And if I had somebody whom I hold up as being my great hero, it's none of those. It's Nye Bevan, somebody who is, I think, a very practical socialist who came from a very traditional left, but sensible perspective.
But your politics have shifted, haven't they? Because you used to be pro-PFI. You used to be quite open-minded to private involvement in the NHS.
No, that's not true. You've got to stop believing what you've read
I've
on
got the quotes
social
here.
media. Well, you are extrapolating from one report that was commissioned by my predecessor in an old job I had, which was about there being greater choice in the NHS, which is the language, of course.
You said we've had PFI in Wales, we had a hospital built down in Baglan through PFI. If PFI works, then let's do it. I'm not someone who gets terribly wound up about some sort of ideological nuances.
And I subsequently feel that PFI left lots of parts of the country, local authorities and health boards, saddled with debt. And that's clearly true. And I subsequently feel that the decisions that the then Labour government took to try and do effectively off-the-book development of schools and hospitals, public services, was a mistake, which is why I'm arguing what we should be doing now is borrowing £200 billion worth of borrowing by the government in order to directly invest in these things. Learn the mistakes of the past.
If you lose, can you rule out joining any kind of breakaway Labour group in Parliament? This is what's being talked about now, is that a load of people will set up a real Labour or a provisional Labour. There's no circumstances under which you would be involved in any kind of split.
Listen, I am...
And do you condemn the people who are talking about it?
Yes, I do. I am Labour full stop. It is the Labour Party or nothing for me. There is no other vehicle that is going to come along. We have been the party for 116 years that has represented working people, my community and across Britain, and it will always be the Labour Party that does that. The people who are talking about a split, unfortunately, are the hard left of the party. It was John McDonnell who looked me in the eye when I went to meet with Jeremy Corbyn, and when I said, John, I think you're sanguine about the prospect of the party splitting, his explicit response was, if that's what it takes. Now, that is when I decided to stand for this job, because I will not stand by and see the great Labour Party that I love broken apart by John McDonnell or anybody else.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
I hope to see you again at a debate.
Now, we return to Syria, where, as we heard earlier, anti-Assad forces are using suicide bombers to inflict casualties on their opponents. But what motivates such jihadists to take so many lives, including their own? The filmmaker Paul Refstal has had rare access to fighters in Syria. He's followed two would-be suicide bombers affiliated to al-Qaeda as they await the order to push the button. In a moment, we'll hear from the filmmaker himself. But first, Jonathan Rugman reports.
ولا تحسبن الله غافلا عما يعمل الظالمون إنما يؤخرهم
Abu Kaswara is not just a singer, but a would-be suicide bomber. Fighting with the al-Nusra group in Syria. This Saudi militant shows off the truck bomb he's been selected to detonate, particularly the Dugma, the suicide button.
هذا زر الدقمة. هذا زر الدقمة. أضغط عليه بإذن الله أرسلهم على جهنم بإذن الله تعالى. إذا ما اشتغل معايا ضغط ما اشتغل معايا خلاص أنا قد فتحت هذا الأمان الثاني. طيب للزر الثاني دقمة ثانية بإذن الله اشتغل. طيب ما اشتغل هذا كورتكس موصول بالداخل بزر الدقمة. إذا فجرت بإذن الله هذه كلها راح تفجر. طبعا العبوات موجهة عبوات الأمام كذا على قدام.
The Norwegian filmmaker Paul Refstal spent 2 months with these al-Nusra fighters last year. Here, salvaging bodies and equipment after a coalition airstrike. And he's talked to men waiting on what's known as the suicide list. Awaiting the final order to kill soldiers from President Assad's regime, Abu Kaswara sings to his baby daughter back in Saudi Arabia, a one-year-old child he has never met.
لئن لم نلتقي في الأرض يوما فموعدنا غدا في دار خلد.
Kaswara's companion is Abu Basir al-Britani. On the left here, on the front line in the northern province of Idlib. Named Britani because he's half British, the other half American.
What do I miss from Britain? I would say anything. I would say the chance to speak to my family face to face. Other than that, Britain is a miserable place to live.
The United Snakes stands ready to work with our GCC partners.
In fact, he's Lucas Kinney, the son of a Hollywood film director. He's also signed up for a suicide mission, though it can take up to 2 years for the call to come from on high. His was a Catholic upbringing in North London. He once played in a heavy metal band, though he doesn't speak to the filmmaker about his past.
From the first building in front of us and everything behind it is the army. So the closest thing is the distance just of the street between us.
Tonight, Abu Kaswara's truck has finally received the order. The command is to detonate it at a Syrian army post. The lorry, laden with several tons of explosives, moves off to the target. We don't know how many people were killed in this enormous blast. The Al-Nusra group was affiliated with Al-Qaeda until last week. Designated a terrorist organization by the US and UK, it has kidnapped and murdered members of religious minorities, including indiscriminate attacks on Alawites, the same religious group as President Assad. But Abu Kaswara has not died for the jihadist cause, not yet. At the last moment, a Turkish fighter was ordered to detonate the truck bomb instead. So now he's training suicide bombers to blow up a BMP, a troop carrier full of explosives.
فهذه سهلة أمرها بسيطة البي ام بي هاي السرعة هاي كيلو المدراج أيوة بس أنت ما يعني أنت رايح تبغى تنفذ عملية استشهادية بتقعد تطلع أنت ماشي كم؟ طبعا لا راح تكون متسوق أيوة بس وصلت العدو أفتح الأمان بس وصلت العدو أفتح الأمان وأضغط الزر وأنت على الجنة بإذن الله الحور أنت بس تهمك الحور بس الجنة فيها كرم الله فيها رؤية وجه الله سبحانه وتعالى إن شاء الله أيه.
But finally, Abu Kaswara's time seems to have come. He claims he's in a hurry to blow himself up.
يسكن في الفردوس الأعلى من الجنة مع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وصحبه الكرام وخلاص ما عندي شيء أنا مستعجل يا شيخ. السلام عليكم. الله يبارك فيك.
His friend Al-Britani has his orders too, but he tells the filmmaker he's now got married.
Have you talked with your wife about it?
Yeah.
And what does she say?
Like I said, if your wife is a believing woman with strong faith, then she should help you in all aspects of your life. But at the end of the day, a human is a human. And women, much more than men, are emotional. So it's not, for sure, it's not an easy subject. If you love your wife and your wife loves you, especially the woman doesn't want to think of life without her husband. But
with his wife also expecting a baby, this change of circumstance signals a change of mind.
the physical action is very easy. You go, you drive, you press the button. But how many get put in this position can actually press the button, knowing that, except that Allah has decreed otherwise, that, that you are departing to the meeting with Allah, the Mighty and Majestic, is something very heavy.
His friend Kaswara isn't dead either. Once again, he's avoided self-destruction. Paradise postponed because of rocks on the line.
اليوم اللي قبله أنا كنت مستطلع ما كان فيه ساتر، فيوم جيت أنفذ لقيت فيه ساتر، الساتر عبارة عن صخور كبار، صخور كبار، فحاولت جيت بالبي ام بي أحاول أدفها بالبي ام بي ما يرضى، يعني ما حسنت أدفها.
While Al-Brittani realises he can't go through with it either.
I can't put my family in that situation. Really. I know what it's like for the one left behind. I've seen that with my own eyes. But to make that conscious decision, I mean, it's very different now. It's very different now.
Eventually, Kaswara is retired from the suicide list. He's clearly much happier here, running a race to eat bananas. Two men supposedly summoned then, but failing to answer the call. A Briton and a Saudi, and both of them are still in Syria. Paul Refstal's film, a rare glimpse into jihadists' lives.
And Paul Refstal's film is released tomorrow, and he joins me now. What was the story you were hoping to tell when you set out on this project?
Well, I wanted to show the everyday life of our enemy. And I didn't want to make it kind of just a quick fix, staying with them for a few days. I wanted to stay as long time as possible so that they really opened up and that I could show the real Al-Qaeda.
I mean, how did you get them to accept you in the first place?
It took a lot of time. I mean, it took about 1.5 years before I actually set foot in Syria until I was able to start filming. At the end of the day, they told me you can write an application with a CV and references and all these things. And after a few weeks, they accepted that.
I mean, you're a Muslim convert yourself.
Yeah.
Was that critical, do you think, to them allowing you this sort of access?
They say that even non-Muslim journalists can apply and can get permission, so I really don't know. What they also told me was that I was on the Al-Qaeda good list, so to say, of journalists.
Did that set alarm bells ringing, suggesting that you were perhaps sympathetic?
No, it's probably because I had a Taliban film a few years back, which they noticed because it gave the Taliban, let's say, a fair treatment, because it was not judgmental, so to say.
It's interesting you talk about it not being judgmental. One of the striking things about the film is that there's no challenge to any of these men, even as they're talking about, you know, we're hoping to blow people to hell.
Yeah.
Why did you decide not to challenge them?
Well, that's the concept of the film. This is not like a typical TV report. I wanted to make let's say, a fly-on-the-wall documentary. Just let the people talk, just let the situation run, and intervene as little as possible.
There is a difficulty with that, or there will be for a lot of people, in that, you know, you set out almost to humanise people, and there is a sort of, it's very banal, a lot of their life, washing dishes, having tea, but they are involved, or the plan is to be involved in an act of barbarity.
Well, it's an act of war. I mean, this group, they are attacking military targets with the bombs. They are not going into marketplaces and crowded streets.
And that's justified in your view?
Yeah, I mean, it would be like, you know, UK dropping a bomb on a military target. It's the same thing. It's blowing up a lot of explosives, you know, so I don't see this breaking any Geneva Convention or, let's say, moral codes for a war.
But did you see no difficulty in, as I say, you know, this very mundane aspect of life, yet what they're doing ultimately leads to people dying? These two men didn't go ahead with their mission.
These are soldiers, you know, and as long as they are attacking military targets, I don't have any problem with that. I mean, if they were, to say it quite bluntly, if they were attacking civilians, I wouldn't have done the film for sure.
One of the most interesting characters is undoubtedly Al-Britani, this young man brought up in London. What sense did you get of him, of how he's ended up in this situation?
Well, he's a very young guy. He's 27, I think, now. I think he has matured a lot during the years he's been fighting with Nusra. I mean, he got wounded in 2014. While I was there, he got married, and that was a big change for him. And he gets the information that maybe his wife is pregnant.
And it changes everything.
It changes everything.
Paul Restal, I'm really sorry. We're going to have to end it there. Thank you so much for coming in. Thank you. Krishnan.
After the break, the Battle of Byron Burgers. We report on the latest mass protest launched against the restaurant chain after it had 25 of its workers deported as illegal immigrants.
Welcome back. It started with a call to a health and safety briefing, but it led to the arrest of 35 staff, with 25 deported as illegal immigrants. A campaign to boycott the Byron Burger chain and then a protest releasing hundreds of live insects into one of its restaurants. There's another demonstration tonight outside one central London branch of the chain, and our reporter Simeon Brown is there. So, Simeon.
Now, the way that you view this protest depends largely on your stance on immigration. For these protesters, they wanted to show migrant and minority solidarity. But for those who voted to leave the European Union under the premise that immigration was too high, they'd probably support what Byron did. For those in the middle ground, they say, why campaign against a company when ultimately the government's responsible? The issue, though, is that our resistance campaigns are going to become more militant.
These were two things not on the menu at Byron: cockroaches and locusts, served by activists protesting against the fashionable burger bar's decision to help the Home Office deport staff who were working without the correct immigration status. The action has been claimed by the London Black Revolutionaries. But who are they? They were one of the groups behind this protest against rising rents in South London that ended with this, and first hit the headlines pouring cement over anti-homeless spikes in the capital. But now we are told the London Black Revs is less a movement and more just one man. This man called Arnie Hill. He did not speak to us today, but we did speak to him a year ago after the Conservative Party election win.
When I heard the Tories got back into government, I didn't actually feel an inch of despair. I just felt we need to move, we need to start organising, we need to start resisting. There's so many things they want to do, and we have to resist. We have to resist in full force.
This resistance is captured in a new film.
There's a thirst for this kind of organisation, which is young, black, revolutionary, militant.
Former comrades allege all members were kicked out for challenging Mr. Hill's plans and conduct. A former member says the real issues are now being missed.
It wasn't done by people that I organise with. It was a unilateral decision. I think it's important to focus on the work that's done to liaise with the workers in Byron and in other places, because it's not the first time it happens.
But on social media, not everyone is behind the boycott. Some have said the use of direct action has backfired. Others said it hurt the workers it was meant to support. And the company gave us this statement.
The safety of our customers and restaurant teams is paramount. Our priority is now to work with local police to minimise the risk of further incident.
Today's protesters want Byron to know that what they did, even if legally right, was morally wrong.
That's it for tonight. Until tomorrow, that's Channel 4 News. Have a very good evening.
Good evening.